abuse across the state of Alabama. The attorneys, proudly sponsored by Hollis, Wright & Couch, are here to serve you. Your tough legal questions answered by our experts. The attorneys with Josh Wright from the Hollis, Wright & Couch law firm and host David Lamb.
Hello and welcome into The Attorneys. We appreciate you being with us tonight for the next half hour. The whole purpose of us being here with our panel of experts is to answer your tough legal questions. We try to make it easy. You can call, text, email. You can even do that throughout the show. That information will be on your screen throughout this program. And to lead the discussion, Josh Wright from the firm of Hollis, Wright & Couch. Good to see you, sir.
You too. Hope you had a great week.
Indeed it did.
We try, David, each week to bring on true experts in their field, and we have done that here. Assistant Director of the Department of Forensic Sciences here in the state of Alabama, Angelo DellaManna, is going to be with us today. He's going to be answering questions kind of related to, you know, we see Law and Order, SVU, and the forensics that go into those types of shows. Yeah. We're going to be talking in the real world how that applies and what impact it has on the law and on criminal cases as well as civil cases. So, Angelo, thank you so much for being on today. We're excited to have you here.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for the invitation.
And this is something he breathes and lives every day, so it's going to be exciting.
So what we watch, I mean, those shows are so popular. They're all over television, Angelo. First of all, just got to tell us what does your office do?
Well, the Department of Forensic Sciences is really unique here in Alabama. We're the only crime lab system that services all of Alabama. We're an independent agency and the second oldest crime lab system in the country. We've been around since 1935, and our responsibility is to analyze all items of physical evidence that relate to any criminal act that may occur within the borders of Alabama, as well as ones across state lines and really have an impact throughout the country.
When we talk about evidence, we're not just talking about DNA. It's much broader than that, isn't it?
That's exactly right. It is much broader than that. We analyze everything from the crime scene to the courtroom. So we conduct all of the autopsies and unexplained and unattended deaths that occur throughout Alabama. We also analyze firearms and tool marks, drugs that are obtained during a traffic stop, for example, toxicology specimens to analyze drugs and poisons that may be present in deceased individuals to try and determine cause and manner of death and things of that nature. It's not just DNA, although that does get a lot of the publicity.
Now, before you legal guys jump in here, I've got to know, whenever you watch those shows, you know, I mean, they're all over the place. Whenever you're sitting at home and you're watching them, what's going through your mind? What are your impressions?
Well, my first impressions are that our future jurors are also watching these shows. Right. And so that has been, in my 20 years, very beneficial on the one hand in educating the jury about some of the abilities that we have in a real crime lab setting, some of the technologies that we have available to us that we can and can't do certain things. Right. The flip side to that, though, is we oftentimes have to also educate the juries on what we're not capable of doing that is capable on SVU and Law and Order, for example, and certainly the time frames are much different.
It sometimes almost sets a higher bar, doesn't it?
It absolutely sets a much higher bar that we have to explain to the juries of what we can and can't do and what the realistic timeline is. The science just needs to work.
The impact of the forensics world is significant in the legal realm, David. It doesn't just apply in criminal cases, and we've been talking a little bit about criminal cases. It also applies in civil cases. Imagine DUIs. And other cases where biologic samples are critical and important to substantiate somebody was at a scene, driving a vehicle, what position they were operating a vehicle in at the time of an accident, those things. So we deal with the Department of Forensic Sciences at our firm often. In fact, before we got on, I was asking whether or not he worked and studied under one of the former Department of Forensic Science experts that we do a lot of work with now. And so it applies both in a criminal and a civil context.
Yeah. A question, some great questions that we get. One is the technology they use on the TV shows, you know, like the Law and Orders, is that in use in your office?
A lot of the technology that is demonstrated on those shows like SVU and Law and Order is in fact used in our state crime lab system. One of the great things in Alabama is that we are on the cutting edge of a lot of different technologies in the forensic community and are a national leader in our forensic DNA program, firearms and tool marks, and drug chemistry. So a lot of the things that are happening in terms of what we can and can't do in the real world, we are able to do. Now, the some of the technologies that are also showcased on the television shows are not realistic. There isn't one instrument that analyzes everything. If you watch a lot of these shows, they always seem to have that one instrument that you put it in and press a button and it'll come up with an individual's face and a GPS location of where they're at and their driver's license photo, and that's not realistic.
You want to invent that, don't you?
Correct, right.
Well, another question. How reliable is DNA evidence in trial?
DNA evidence, I believe, is one of the most reliable pieces of evidence. It's been certainly the subject of government studies and National Academy of Sciences reports before it could be admitted in the legal setting, both in the civil and criminal arena. So it's been extensively researched and validated and is probably the most reliable objective evidence that can be presented in the court of law.
Angelo, talk just briefly about chain of custody and how that works, because that's kind of a critical component of what you guys do, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. The chain of custody is oftentimes refers to where and when is every piece of evidence at any given time. And the chain of custody begins at the crime scene. And so from the crime scene to the courtroom, we have the responsibility of being able to say, on this particular date and this particular time, who had it, where was it, and who had access to it. That is what is referred to as the chain of custody. And the importance of that chain of custody is to ensure that once that evidence ends up in the courtroom for the trier of fact, either the judge or the jury, that they have confidence in that it cannot have been tampered with, no evidence was lost, contaminated, or destroyed. And so that's the importance of
assure and maintain that the sample that was pulled related to an individual is related to that individual, and to cross-reference those things. In the courtroom, what happens if you don't meet chain of custody sometimes is the evidence is inadmissible. And so that's significant. So the Department of Forensic Sciences really provides a check on the system to ensure that chain of custody is maintained, as Angela mentioned, from the scene all the way to the courtroom.
A really interesting discussion we're having tonight. Time for our first break. As we head to break, a reminder of how you can get in touch with us and the firm of Hollis, Wright & Couch. You can call, text, email, easy to do so. That information right there. You can also find them on Facebook. Just search the term Hollis, Wright & Couch, and on Twitter, follow them there. That's Hollis_Wright. Stay tuned. More of the attorneys coming right up.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis, Wright & Couch, and thanks for watching The Attorneys on Alabama's 13. Now, we hope you, a friend, or a loved one never need legal counsel for a case. But if you do, the goal of the show is simple. Provide answers and legal counsel when you need it the most. Your call to the show is free, so if you have questions specific to this show or related to other civil legal matters, call, email, or text us to talk with one of our lawyers. You can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter to learn about important legal news that could affect you or your family. Or simply contact us by going to alabamas13.com and click on the Attorneys link. We know your time is valuable, so thank you for spending it with us and for watching The Attorneys right here on Alabama's 13.
Welcome back in to the attorneys. A fascinating discussion. How accurate is what we see on those TV shows that we like Law and Order. We're discussing forensic science and how it is used in the court of law. An interesting conversation that we're having. One that you often see on those TV shows is, boy, the fingerprint. The fingerprints get the bad guy all the time. So a question here, how much of a fingerprint do you need to get a match? And is this reliable evidence in court?
Fingerprints are indeed reliable evidence. The subject of analyzing fingerprints is now very contentious in the national community. There is a federal report that just came out a couple of years ago that is trying to address how many points within the individual fingerprints you actually need to call it a match. Okay. And that's really a concern in the forensic community, where one jurisdiction may say, if you find 10 individual points, they would call that a match. Another jurisdiction may need 15 points to call it a match. And so the concern is, well, what if you're in a third jurisdiction and you have 12? One may call it and one would not call it. So it's trying to standardize and look at some objective science-based research to address this National Academy of Sciences report that has been published and the funds appropriated by our senior senator, Richard Shelby, to address that very concern. But in terms of its admissibility, it's certainly one of the oldest adoptive principles of forensic science, and everybody's fingerprint is different. The fingerprints are developed in utero as the baby responds to the different pressures and stresses in the womb. So that's how come everybody's individual fingerprints are different. So from a comparative science, you have a fingerprint at the crime scene. That's what's often called a latent fingerprint. And if you have, you know, a series of details within that fingerprint, different ridges that break off and certain patterns, you can compare that to both a national database, the FBI's National Fingerprint Database, to identify an individual. But when you have a smudged, oftentimes, fingerprint, you may or may not have enough points of interest. And I think what's really lost in these television shows is how the vast majority of the time you really don't have an adequate surface on which to develop a fingerprint. The grip of a firearm, for example, is very often a rough, corrugated type surface, so it's just not a very nice smooth substrate to deposit a fingerprint. So your ability to collect a fingerprint is hindered just by the surface. Whereas in television, you can always obtain a certain
Angelo, are there, the national database, is there really a computer system that literally works through what fingerprints you've got, and it goes through a computer system and finds and picks out potential matches? Is that how it works?
There is. The FBI's Criminal Justice Information System maintains what's called the IAFIS, or the Fingerprint Database. Millions and millions of records, not just from state crimes and federal crimes, but also different sections of that database also have a variety of different background checks. Department of Homeland Security can query those for watch lists and things of that nature. So there's different avenues and in law enforcement and the justice system that can tap into the National Fingerprint Database that is maintained by the FBI.
As I recall, when I became a lawyer, we had to provide fingerprints, so we probably in that system too. All the lawyers very well may be in there. So it sounds like that system is not just coming from people that have been convicted of crimes before. It may come from a whole host of different areas.
That's correct, and there's different registries within it to allow certain searching parameters. In Alabama, for example, people who are going to be doing civil work with children, for example, daycare providers, teachers, are required statutorily to undergo certain level background check. That's not the same as the full level criminal background check that would have a complete search against all of our unsolved cases and things of that nature. But it is to see if there's any felony warrants and things of that nature out there.
Another question we have here, this from a former jury member. I've served on a jury before, and a forensic scientist testified. He talked a lot about scientific certainty and reliable methods and procedures. What does that mean?
Scientific certainty and procedures is part of what we call a robust quality system. We've got to make sure that every case that is worked within the state crime lab system is correct. And so we have a series of very defined protocols that we want to make sure that if it's, for example, a homicide case in a rural area or a homicide case in a metropolitan area, that the same care and quality of the work is conducted on each and every one of those. So by every analyst also. So uniformity and consistency is very important, as well as each of the scientific principles that we're using on every case, because every case is slightly different. But are the underlying scientific principles that are used to test the evidence on the case valid and reliable and appropriate for that case? So there's very little latitude, if you will, in a scientist being able to kind of go off the cuff and do certain tests on a particular item of evidence. There's margins that are developed by objective scientific research that analysts have to stay within. And so we try and communicate that to the jury, that, look, we have a very robust quality system, because we have to make sure that every one of our cases, the science on it that is performed upon it is correct, reliable, and therefore they can trust the end result.
What's the background of a person that does your type of work? What's the general background from an education perspective?
Generally, the minimum requirements in Alabama is a bachelor's degree in one of the natural sciences. So it can be biology, chemistry, or physics, things of that nature, with certain core courses in chemistry, For example, if they're going to work in the drug chemistry section or the firearm section, if they want to work in the DNA section, then they have to have certain academic requirements in compliance with the FBI standards that involve genetics, molecular biology, and biochemistry.
As an assistant director with the Department of Forensic Sciences, do you have a specialty that you focus on?
My specialty is DNA.
Okay. Interesting.
More questions. Are certain forensic techniques more reliable and trustworthy?
I believe so, and I think the National Academy's report that I referenced earlier has demonstrated that very thing. I think at the very one end of the spectrum, where the most reliable evidence would be DNA evidence, in my opinion, and the National Academy of Sciences report has then labeled the subjective disciplines, where it's a very comparative science, question documents, comparing a signature to a known exemplar, hairs and fibers, firearms and tool marks. Those types of disciplines, not invalid in terms of being admissible in criminal courts, but not having the basic scientific underlying research that has been peer-reviewed and published to demonstrate that it is absolutely consistent and reliable in court to the level of DNA evidence.
Interesting.
Time for our final break of the evening. As we head to break, still time to get your questions to us. Call, text, email. Also find the firm on Facebook. You'll just search Hollis, Wright & Couch, or on Twitter, Hollis_Wright. Stay tuned. The final segment of The Attorney is coming right up.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis, Wright & Couch. Now, serving on a jury can be confusing because there's some information that the attorneys in the case aren't allowed to tell you about. And in a wrongful death case, it might surprise you what information can come in. In tonight's Legal 4-in-1, we're answering the question, what evidence is allowed in a wrongful death case? That's a case where one person's conduct caused the death of another. A wrongful death case is a civil cause of action for someone's death where money damages may be awarded, not jail time. In these cases, a lawyer can only talk about punishing and deterring the defendant for causing the death. That leaves out a lot of information about the person who died, including how that person's death has affected his family and his community. The reason lawyers only talk about punishing and deterring the defendant in these cases is this. In a death case, at the end of the trial, the judge will read a jury charge which says, the damages in this case are punitive and not compensatory. Punitive damages are awarded to preserve human life, to punish the defendant for its wrongful conduct, and to deter or discourage the defendant and others from doing the same or similar wrongs in the future. Now, this means that in Alabama, lawyers can't talk about how great the loss was to his family or friends. They can't talk about the lost wages or the financial impact on that person's family for the person that passed away. Lawyers can't even mention how much that person loved his wife, kids, or grandkids, or what it would have meant to walk a daughter down the aisle or attend a prom. In short, lawyers can't talk about all the things that person who died at the hands of another missed out on in his own life. In Alabama, the legislature has said you can't put a value on someone's life. So as lawyers, what we can do, the only thing we can do, is ask that the defendant is deterred and punished for the wrongful conduct that caused the death in the first place. We can ask that a jury send a message, a loud message, to prevent such types of death in the future. As an example, if a truck driver caused a crash where someone died, the jury can send a message, a loud message, to that truck driver by making the truck driver pay money damages. The hope is that other drivers will be discouraged from the dangerous conduct that caused the death in the first place. As attorneys, we often wish we could submit more evidence to the court about the person who died, but unfortunately the rules don't allow it. If you ever have been a juror on such a case, please keep that in mind, what we've told you today. Remember, your call, email, or text to the attorneys is free. All of us at Hollis, Wright & Couch want to help answer your questions on real issues you face. A competent lawyer will respond to every question you send in. That's our pledge and promise to you. And as always, thanks on Sunday nights for watching the attorneys right here on Alabama's 13.
back in to the attorneys. Fascinating conversation here. Our final segment, but reminders that you'll still see ways that you can call, text, or email the show. And Josh, I got to tell you, after our visit with Angelo here, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to watch Law and Order the same way.
No, there's no way. There's no way we'll be able to. Talk to us about these things we hear about in the news, Angelo, where there is a wrongful conviction and DNA is used to exonerate somebody down the road. So it's not just used to convict, but it can also be used to exonerate, can it not?
It can very much so be used to exonerate. And again, that's where I think Alabama is uniquely positioned throughout the country. As an independent state agency, the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences, we don't have a dog in that fight. So we work evidence that the prosecution requests. We also work evidence free of charge that the defense requests. And oftentimes, we are requested to look at old cases where convictions are based solely on eyewitness testimony that may or may not have any physical evidence at the time the trial was first provided to the jury. And we've gone back on a series of those cases in conjunction with a variety of different firms and legal experts and evaluated them, and now helped craft our legislation here in Alabama to allow post-conviction relief in terms of DNA specifically. For capital cases in Alabama, we've gone back and sequentially kind of gone through the cases that didn't have DNA testing either available or conducted on them initially. And if they were available and a judge agreed that it would be probative evidence, we have conducted that testing certainly free of charge and then let the results fall where they may. Because as an independent state agency, we just present our results to the officers of the court and then let the trier of fact determine the weight that they give it.
And the court system then gets to make the judgment call as to whether or not they're going to reconsider those things or not. And oftentimes it's presented through a motion with a judge, for example. Talk to us a little bit about cold cases in general and how the Department of Forensic Sciences uses the technology that you have today to be able to kind of retrospectively look back at older cases and potentially create some convictions.
Correct. Again, with the Department of Forensic Sciences, we have a very aggressive federal grant efforts, and we've been very fortunate with our senior senator, Richard Shelby, and Jeff Sessions, both being the ranking members on both appropriations and authorizations at the federal level, that they've been very supportive of our federal grant efforts. The state legislature as well, under Senator Marsh and Speaker Hubbard, very supportive of us going back to look at older cases. And we've crafted this proposal over the last several years where we've petitioned the Department of Justice and said, we don't believe that the date that a woman is assaulted or a family member has lost a loved one should prohibit them, the date that that event occurred, should prohibit them from having 21st century technology used on that case to analyze the evidence. So as we've gone back to those old cases, homicide cases from the 70s and the 80s before DNA evidence was even around in a forensic setting, as well as old unsolved sexual assaults, we've worked those cases. We've entered that DNA profile into the National DNA Database and identified per capita more cases than any other state in the union.
That's great.
Over 50 a month, roughly, continuously, every month. That's how many cold case hits we're getting here in Alabama.
And David, just so it's clear to the viewers, just because DNA comes back on something that happened 30 years ago doesn't necessarily mean that gets in front of a jury. There are rules of evidence and there's a whole legal process that has to be followed in order for that evidence to actually be able to make it to a courtroom and make it to a jury and to create a conviction or overturn a conviction. So there's a series of steps that have to go through the entire process.
We have just a couple of minutes, but from your standpoint, you've talked about the technological advances. What shortcomings do you have, and what changes would you like to see made when it comes to forensic science?
I think the biggest shortcoming here in Alabama, as well as throughout the country, is a question of resources. I like to try and educate individuals within the justice system, judges, prosecutors, defense counsel, that there's really three elements to the forensic science work. There's the quality of the work that we do. There's the time it takes to do the work that we do. And then there's the cost associated with the work. Now, in any case, people can pick any two of those. So if they want it extremely cheap, as a state agency, we conduct it free of charge for the court system, and they want really high quality, then the time is the one that they're going to have to wait for. If they want it really fast and really high quality, now the cost would go up because we would have to put that case above all others, and it would be expensive. Or if they want it really fast and really cheap, now unfortunately the quality may be compromised. So that's kind of the three-legged stool that I try and educate individuals with, that it's a question of resources, that if we just have the sufficient amount of people to do the work, we've demonstrated that when we did have enough people before the state general fund budget cuts impacted us over the last 4 years, we didn't have any drug cases that were older than 30 days old.
Amazing. An interesting conversation tonight. Just a minute left. Final thoughts from you guys. Angelo, you first.
I would just say that first, thanks for the invitation, and I really hope that the general public is sympathetic to our cause, that we are very empathetic to every case that we have to work, and we recognize that it takes a certain amount of time to do the work, and unfortunately that time can be a hindrance to many families, and we're certainly sympathetic to that.
You know, I'd just say, kind of in closing, that it's interesting if you kind of see what Angelo does on a daily basis. This type of technology is impactful in the courtroom, not in just criminal cases, but also in civil cases. And as lawyers, our firm and other firms across the state use this kind of stuff on a daily basis to try and meet elements and claims to support causes of action.
Yeah, it's a fascinating show, fascinating conversation. Angelo, thanks so much for your time. Josh, good to see you as well. And thank you for tuning in tonight as we wrap this up. Ways you can contact the firm of Hollis, Wright & Couch. Find them on Facebook. Just search Hollis, Wright & Couch. And on Twitter, it's Hollis_Wright. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for watching The Attorneys, sponsored by the law firm of Hollis, Wright & Couch.